Matthew Evans, an affluent man in his late 70s, sat alone in his silver Mercedes, tapping his thumb impatiently against the steering wheel. The air conditioner hummed, barely keeping the Kentucky heat at bay, retired and affluent from a life of business, in finance. Matthew was used to things going in his favor. But that day he found himself stranded with a flat tire far from the luxuries of his beautiful residence. Near the outskirts of town, after a couple attempts to call for roadside help with no luck, he groaned and resigned himself to the idea that he'd have to wait. Just when he started to feel a sense of frustration bubbling up, he noticed a figure going toward him down the road. A young lad, maybe 13 or 14, wearing a faded t-shirt and worn-out sneakers, approached. With a resolute expression, Matthew observed as the boy's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing the automobile before giving Matthew a polite but confident nod, got a flat "sir." The child asked, his voice steady, "Yes, yes, I do." Matthew replied, experiencing an odd mix of relief and worry. "I was hoping for a bit of help, but my phone's got no signal out here." The child flashed a tiny smile. "I can help with that," he said, kneeling beside the tire without hesitating. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. Do you have a spare?" Matthew indicated to the trunk, watched as the boy unlocked it and pulled out the necessary tools. The young lad worked fast, his hands working with a quiet certainty. It appeared almost beyond his years. When Matthew stood there, he felt a peculiar humility creeping in, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wanted to offer the youngster something in return, but the young man hardly looked up, focusing carefully on the subject at hand. After a few minutes, the boy finished, wiping his hands on his jeans and stepping back. "All done," he said, merely offering a modest, satisfied smile. Matthew reached into his wallet and pulled out a couple bills, holding them out to the boy. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." But the boy took a step back, raising his hand respectfully. "Thank you, sir. However, I don't need anything, just delighted to help." Shocked, Matthew stood there, money still in Hondas. He watched the child turn and go away down the road. The interaction had left him moved somehow, though he couldn't quite put a finger on why alone. Now he slid the money back into his pocket, then got back into his car, watching in the rearview mirror when the boy's silhouette grew smaller in the distance. During the rest of his drive, Matthew's thoughts kept going, back to the youngster. There was a gentle nobility about him, a self-assurance that wasn't born from money or privilege, but from something deeper. That night, while he sat alone in his beautiful home, Matthew found himself unable to dismiss the sight of the youngster walking away with nothing but a smile. That evening, Matthew sat in the leather recliner of his study, surrounded by stacks of literature he rarely opened. The room was quiet, but for the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, his meal, a wonderfully prepared steak and asparagus, sat untouched on the side table. He couldn't quit thinking about the youngster. Matthew had encountered thousands of people in his lifetime. Business partners, employees, investors, most exchanges revolved. Upon negotiating favors and bargains, there was always an exchange, a price, or an anticipation. But this boy, this stranger, had assisted him for no motive other than goodwill. He leaned back, sipping his scotch, the remembrance of the boy's confident smile replayed. In his mind, he didn't look like someone who had much. Matthew thought, the worn sneakers, the faded clothes, the dust on his hands, it all told a tale, and yet the youngster carried himself with a type of integrity that seems so unusual these days. The next morning, Matthew couldn't resist the temptation to find the boy. He didn't know why, but something inside him seemed unfinished. Maybe it was guilt, maybe gratitude, or maybe simply curiosity. Whatever it was, he found himself traveling down the same stretch of road, searching the horizon for any sign of the boy Howard's past. As he stopped at petrol stations and small diners, asking anyone who would listen whether they'd observed a little boy match the description. Most shrugged or shook their heads. until eventually an older woman behind the bar at a little cafe spoke up sounds. "Like you're talking about." "Elijah," she remarked, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy's always helping folks around here, lives with his mama over in Harlan. Matthew repeated, creating a mental note. "Thank you." The town of Harlan was an hour distant situated, in the foothills of the Appalachians. The journey was gorgeous, but Matthew scarcely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. What kind of life did this boy have? What type of family reared someone like that? Moment he arrived in Harlan, the streets were silent, bordered with modest residences and small shops. He interviewed a few folks about Elijah and was eventually pointed to a little cottage on the edge of town. The house was worn, but neat, with a front porch that sagged slightly beneath its own weight. Matthew parked his car and stopped for a bit, unsure of what he would even say. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. It opened a moment later, exposing a woman in her early 40s. She seemed exhausted, but kind, her eyes sharp and interested as she sized him. "Up, can I assist you?" she inquired. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to annoy you, although I believe I saw your son yesterday." "Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a little smile. "He's always assisting folks. I just wanted to thank him properly." Matthew said he wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "He's out back. You're welcome to wait." Matthew stepped inside, taking in the modest surroundings. The furnishings was ancient but clean, the walls adorned with family photos and a few handmade images. They looked like they came from a much younger Elijah. That was a vast distance from his own house, with its immaculate surfaces and costly artwork, yet something about this place felt warmer, more alive. He followed her out to the backyard, while Elijah was mending the fence. The boy looked up astonished to see Matthew high. "Mr. Elijah," said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Matthew grinned, feeling unusually uneasy. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I truly needed it, and I just couldn't quit thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression casual and sincere. It wasn't a big deal, but to Matthew it was, and he was determined to show it. Elijah leaned on the fence, his keen gaze locked on Matthew. For a moment, neither of them talked. The boy's calm demeanor made Matthew feel little out of place, as though he were the one being assessed. "I don't think you appreciate what a major deal it was," Matthew eventually remarked. Breaking the silence, folks don't normally help strangers without expecting something in return. Elijah tilted his head slightly, as if puzzled by the statement. "I don't see it like that," he said. "If someone needs aid, and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Matthew was astonished by the simplicity of the boy's logish, gazed past Elijah to the yard. The fence was cobbled together using mismatched wood, the grass uneven and sparse behind the house. An old swing set leaned precariously, its chains rusted and broken. It was evident that Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. "You've got a decent head on your shoulders," Matthew stated, meaning it. "Your mommy must be proud." Elijah grinned, staring back toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Matthew was quiet for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. He thought of his own childhood, spent in a house much like this one. His parents had worked frantically to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. Over the years, he had drifted away from those lessons, caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status. Now, standing in this yard, he had a weird sensation of nostalgia and melancholy. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Matthew stated at last. Elijah straightened up his expression, cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything. It's not about need," Matthew insisted. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to repay the favor." Before Elijah could react, his mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "Elijah, you best come inside and wash up before lunch," she called. Then her gaze turned to Matthew. "Would you care to join us? It's nothing special, but you're welcome." Matthew paused, unaccustomed to such an invitation, but the sincerity in her voice left him no space for explanations. "I'd like that," he said. Following her into the house, inside the kitchen smelt of freshly cooked bread and roasted veggies. The table was modest, surrounded by mismatched seats, but it was set with care. Matthew took a seat, felt weirdly out of place in his fitted suit. Amidst the humble surroundings, Elijah rinsed his hands at the sink and joined them, his easy smile never faltering, as they ate. Matthew found himself drawn into their conversation. Elijah talked about his school, his buddies, and his goals of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about the community, speaking with a quiet pride about the folks that watched out for one another. Matthew listened closely, experiencing a warmth he hadn't had in years, for all his money and success. His own home felt cold and empty compared to this humble house, filled with laughter and genuine connection following lunch when they cleared the table. Matthew turned to Elijah's mother. "You've done a fantastic job raising him. He said he's got more heart than most folks I know." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with appreciation. "Thank you. He's a wonderful boy. Although we've had our issues, we've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew nodded, his mind already turning over thoughts. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't go away without doing something for them. This family had given him a gift. He hadn't even realized he needed a reminder of what actually mattered. Matthew departed their home that afternoon with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. Traveling back to his estate, he began to plant. This wasn't about charity. It was about commemorating the boy's selflessness and the family's resiliency. Elijah and his mother deserved more than patched fences and worn furniture. They deserved stability and credit for the strength they exhibited every day. The next morning, Matthew made call slots of them. He went out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers. Around lunchtime, a plan was set in action. Within a week, vehicles and workers began arriving at Elijah's home. Matthew stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, overseeing the improvements as Elijah and his mother gazed on in shock. "You didn't have to do this," Elijah's mother said, her voice trembling, as she watched the crew unload supplies. "We've managed nicely on our own." Matthew turned to her, his expression sincere. "You've done more than manage, you've thrived, but you offered me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me give back." Elijah was quieter than usual, standing next to his mother with a contemplative look on his face. Matthew knelt slightly, meeting his eye. "You taught me something, Elijah. Helping people isn't about money. It's about showing up. I want to show up for you over the next several weeks." The house underwent a transformation. The sinking porch was replaced with robust wood, the roof fixed, and the rusted swing set out back was replaced by a fresh one. Inside, the walls were painted, the floors polished, and the kitchen upgraded with modern appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help with the renovations, carrying planks and sweeping debris, but Matthew demanded him. "Take a break. Your task," Matthew stated with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a short while." Still, Elijah couldn't resist, sneaking out to watch the team work, his eyes lighting up with curiosity as he witnessed them measure, cut, and build one of the laborers. A hefty dude named Joe noted his attention and encouraged him to help measure wood planks. Before long, Elijah was asking inquiries regarding tools and construction, his excitement infectious. Matthew watched from a distance, a warm pride surging in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something worthwhile, something beyond oneself. The boy's vigor reminded him of the ambition he previously had. Prior life became a whirl of boardrooms and stock portfolios. One evening, as the sun dropped low, the project was nearing its end. The family stood on the porch, marveling at the transformation. Elijah's mother resorted to Matthew, her voice strangled with emotion. "This isn't simply a house anymore. It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Matthew shook his head, his tone gentle. You already have. You reminded me of what life is meant to be about. Family link and purpose. I guess I'm the one who should be thanking you. The final day of the renovation project felt like a celebration. Neighbors stopped by to witness the changes, delivering smiles and tiny presents, fresh-baked bread jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant. Elijah's laughter boomed through the yard as he rushed around showing his friends the new swing set and the freshly painted. Rooms within the house once exhausted and worn now radiated life. Matthew stood on the front porch, leaning against the robust new railing, watching the situation develop. He hadn't felt this type of joy in years. Simple, genuine satisfaction that came from seeing others thrive. Elijah's mother stepped over, a cup of iced tea in her hand. She offered it to him with a smile. "You've done more than fix a house," she said quietly. "You've given us hope. And I hope you found something for yourself, too." Matthew nodded. Taking a sip, he admitted, "I spent so many years chasing things I believed mattered. Money, status, influence. But none of it feels like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun began to set, Elijah joined them on the porch, his energy still boundless. He stared at Matthew, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Matthew," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for us. I want to accomplish something like that one day. I want to help people too." Matthew placed a hand on Elijah's shoulders. Voice steady. "You already are, Elijah. Your benevolence set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching the sky transition from gold to deep orange. The warmth of the day lingered, but there was a deeper warmth that comes from connection, thankfulness, and a common sense of purpose. When it was time for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's broad grin and his mother's sorrowful smile were imprinted into Matthew's memory as he drove. Away, this wasn't the end, he realized. This was simply the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. The weeks that followed brought additional changes. Elijah's sudden curiosity about construction developed into a passion. Matthew arranged for him to spend time shadowing the workers who had helped restore the house. Elijah soaked up every ounce of knowledge. Keen to learn, Matthew in turn felt himself attracted back to Harlan over and again. Each visit felt less like a trip and more like a return home. He no longer felt like an outsider in their life. He was part of something bigger now, and for the first time in years, he was content. The narrative finished where it had begun, in a little town with a great heart, where one act of kindness from a small guy reminded an old guy of life's greatest lesson. It's not about what you have, but what you give.